Thank you all for being here today, and welcome to a session of the Woolf Post-Kantian Philosophy Seminar Series. We've been meeting since last year. For those of you for whom this is your first time attending one of the sessions, just let me briefly explain how the format of the sessions work, and then I'll introduce today's speaker. So the Woolf Post-Kantian Philosophy Seminar Series meets, as I said, once a month, and it's a place for speakers from around the world to share generally works in progress with an audience that can discuss the issues and ask questions. And earlier this month, we had a speaker, Adrian Moore from Oxford, who gave a lecture on Kant. And so keeping with the theme, today's speaker, Professor Emmanuel Falque, will be delivering a talk on Kant as well. Typically, presenters will share work for about an hour or so, and then we'll have a question and answer session of period of about a half hour. So today we're going to project Professor Falque's talk so that we can follow along as he reads his paper. And when he concludes reading his paper, I'll open the forum up for questions and comments. I would ask though, during the talk, if you would just mute your microphone so that there aren't interruptions. And then when we get to the question and answer period, I want to obviously facilitate discussion and have everybody have an opportunity to engage with Professor Falque as much as possible. So if you ask a question, please refrain from posing a follow-up unless you're told to, just so that everyone who's interested in participating will have the time to do so. So Professor Falque is Professor of Philosophy and Honorary Dean at the Faculty of Philosophy of the Catholic University of Paris. He's also, as many of you may know, the founder of the International Network in Philosophy of Religion, or as we like to call it, INPR. He's a theologian and philosopher, or I think more specifically, a phenomenological philosopher. And he's published a number of works, many of which, if not all, have been published in English, including The Wedding Feast of the Lamb, The Metamorphosis of Finitude, Crossing the Rubicon, The Guide to Gethsemane, The Loving Struggle, Nothing to It, and most recently with Whip and Stock Publishers, By Way of Obstacles. And my understanding is that Professor Falque is preparing a lecture for the Gilson Chair in March. So it's very kind of him to take the time to be with us today. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Emmanuel and we can dig into the text. Thanks.
So thanks, Stephen, for the invitation, and thanks to Zachary too, to have invited me and for the organization of this session. Hello to everybody. I will speak about Kant because it is a post-Kantian seminar. So we saw with Stephen that it was a good idea. In fact, from my last book, which is this one, it is in French, The Extra Phenomenon or Phénomène. And this book is not yet translated, but is in translation by Nicolas de Ketelaar. I think many of you know him. And I just want to say that Stephen, Tim Hull made 2 videos on my work. He sent me the second one yesterday, and I think it's very interesting for an introduction to my work about what I will say today. So thanks for the translation, Stephen. So what I will speak about, I will speak about Kant, but not about Kant only, but I will speak about the paradigm of the extra-phenomenal. It means that I wrote this text during the pandemic, and the question was to think the question of the trauma. What does it mean, a trauma? And is it possible to think what is a trauma in the framework of French phenomenology? And I showed that some things lack in French philology, which is the extra phenomenon. And then I wrote another paper, which is now published in English, which is God God in our extra phenomenon, which is to explain how God can be present in our trauma. So this paper is only a philosophical paper, and I will try to explain what does that mean to think the unthinkable. So I will read the text. I think it's better to read the text to see exactly what I want to say, and I will cut a part of the text if it is too long to have time for the discussion. So Kant's Cinnabar, a paradigm of the extra phenomenon, an introduction to think the unthinkable. To think the unthinkable is to go to the limit or to touch the limit, so the thought goes. This is what makes the extra phenomenon unthinkable as such. For being in crisis, those are the 5 examples I always used in my book, The Extra Phenomenon. Grappling with the sickness, a separation, the death of a child, a natural disaster, or a pandemic. Now, there is a separation because I think that the separation falls on us exactly as an illness, in fact. In the 5 points of the example, there is no longer either the infra-phenomenal, the propedeutic to the phenomenality, so that is first, for example, the flow of consciousness in Husserl, the withdrawal of being in Heidegger, or the life road in Merleau-Ponty, nor the supra-phenomenal, which is, for example, and it is now French phenomenology, the face, of course, Levinas, the gift, of course, Marion, the word, of course, Jean-Luc Chrétien, the event or auto-affection, which is Henri, but only the extra-phenomenal. What is it? What I call the extra-phenomenal, which is not only the infra-phenomenal and the supra-phenomenal, that is to say, the double break, or nearly so, of the phenomenizing subject and the phenomenized horizon in the light of an event definitively destroying my ability to phenomenalize, or at the very least, to open up a future. Effectively, certain catastrophes befall me, like a rare rupture, rendering the transcendental as such obsolete. I give an example. I received bad news, and I sent a texto to my wife. I said, it befalls me. And now the texto becomes the beginning of my book, of this book, The Extra Phenomenon. So you see that the books are always coming for our life, of course. An analogy of experience, to express it as Kant, who for the first time in the history of our thought links analogy and experience, becomes unrealizable in what he will rightly call an impossible synthesis. So it is a question, what does it mean, an impossible synthesis? Phenomenology, in its German source, has in effect become unaccustomed to preparing phenomenality, from flows of consciousness to the life road, and phenomenology in its French deployment has turned, or eventually, toward the excess of phenomenality from the face to auto-affection. But, and it is my thesis, between these 2 ways or paths, or rather outside this path, stand the extra phenomenon, or the extra phenomenon, as suit outside analogy, even an experience from the disease to the pandemic, which leads us outside experience, nor in the respect of a counter experience, Marion, and you know that there is a collective book on Marion, I wrote on it, which the title is Counter Experience, nor of an inexperience or the experience of the inexperience, which is Lacoste, about eschatology, but rather, so Stephen, I will prefer to translate an experience, because I think it's not anti-experience, so we'll correct it, an experience as such. Thinking at the limits of phenomenality will then be, strictly speaking, unthinking, not in the sense of the boundless generosity. Alors why boundless generosity? Perhaps you can put in bracket unthinking, dépenser, because unthinking is dépenser in French, and dépenser is can to spend some money, and to not think, because you have the word penser, think, and dépenser. So there is a game on the root. So unthinking, not in the sense of boundless generosity, dépenser, to spend money, but on the contrary, a suit which reaches the limit of suit until it can no longer think, dépenser, which is most often the case in the occurrence of the trauma, or at the very least think otherwise, where the analogies of experience no longer to hold, namely the third category of the table of principle in Kant, which connects as the a priori categories to the a posteriori of experience in time, permanence, production, and community. For the sole purpose of regulating the appartenance of phenomena, I would then stand, strictly speaking, before even the im word. Alors, im word in French, you say immonde. And something which is immonde in French means that is very bad, like Dutch, immonde, and immonde is outside of the word. So there is a second play on the word. Not only in the sense of degusting, of atrocious, even of despairing, but rather due to the inability to make a word, that is to modify experience, since the constituting subject is a small destroyed, but not quite precisely, along with the cephalous origin under the shock of the or phenomenon. Okay. Hence, the apex of Cinnabar. So I will speak about the Cinnabar. What does it mean exactly, the Cinnabar? The apex of the Cinnabar, which is a term used by Kant, to which we ourselves will return to extensively, that internerves in the text precisely at the following decisive point of the first edition of the Critique of the Pure Reason. Oh, so here is my book, my own critique, or everyone you have your critique, and it is on that text that I found the Cinnabar, in which the result of this clarifying analogy is shown ab absurdo, as it were, since its suspension would entail a form of experience whereby either this color, because in fact Cinnabar is a color, hello team, I see you, vermillon, hello, as a color might then become sometimes red, sometimes black, even sometimes heavy, sometimes light, or else a man transformed sometimes into an animal, sometimes into another, or finally the earth covers, sometimes with fruit, sometimes with ice and snow. So I quote this passage of Kant, which is absolutely an incredible one, because it is a place of the destruction of the transcendental itself. It is a passage in the Critique of the Pure Reason in the Transcendental Analytic. So it is Gilles Deleuze, in fact, who saw it in one of his books. As Kant says, I quote, it's okay? Yes, you're right. If the Cinnabar were sometimes red, Cinnabar, it is a red color, vermillon, were sometimes red, sometimes black, sometimes light, sometimes heavy. If a man was transformed sometimes into an animal, sometimes into another, if along there the earth was sometimes covered with fruit, sometimes with ice and snow, what is the consequence in the eyes of Kant? My empirical imagination could never find the occasion to receive in suit the heavy Cinnabar with the representation of the color red. So it could happen, but if it happened, it is the end of the world. That something is at the same time, it is in contradiction with the principle of non-contradiction of Aristotle, at the same time, black, red and black, at the same time, light and heavy, and so on. Certainly, with Kant's Cinnabar, we touch upon the paradox of wanting, of having to think unthinkable, and thus reaching the limits of phenomenality as well of conceptuality. But this is not to see nor understand the necessary distinction from our perspective between, and this is very important distinction for me in my book, The Extra Phenomenon. Okay, it is a book that's speaking about it. Okay. So this is between the unthought, l'impensé, and the unthinkable, l'impensable. For if, so first is the unthought. The most thought-provoking thing in our thought-provoking time is that we are still not thinking, to invoke Martin Heidegger's famous phrase in the 1951 Freiburg course, what is called thinking. It is that thought stand withdrawn and waits precisely to be sought and unveiled, like aletheia, according to the tags that the phenomenologist has assigned to himself. The unthought always looms, large for being thought, lurking with the tapestry of the, what I call, infra-phenomenon. But, and that is my own way, the unthinkable, which is not the unthought, on the contrary, touches the limit of the thinkable, in that it undermines the very possibility of thinking from within. C'est impensable. You say in French, c'est complètement pensable, but I think you say the same in English. Huh? C'est impensable. It is a very well-known expression in France, huh? Where you say something, you can't think it. No, it's not possible. C'est impensable. Or in English, it's unthinkable. I think it exists too. Exclaims precisely in the French language, not only to say of an event that it is unimaginable, but rather that it destroys more than overflows. Overflows, it is a saturated phenomenon, which is not my way. The capacities of imagination, my way, destroy. Cooked into shock of illness, separation, the death of a child, the natural disaster, or pandemic, we suddenly find ourselves out of thought, in the double inability to categorize the a priori, what Kant called analogy, and to link it to the a posteriori, what Kant called experience, analogy and experience. The subject is no longer only outside causality, in the sense that the event will overflow the antecedent cause into something saturated. But that is the subject, or it becomes at one outside the eye. So outside the eye, in French, it is hors jeu. For the people who speak a bit French, hors jeu, you can call jeu, G-E-G-E, or hors jeu, G-A-U, or games, outside of games, outside of me, or outside of the game, jeu. Hors jeu, dazed by what happened to him, unable even to receive from the phenomenon, and therefore to synthesize. It is thus a chaos, which is a very important chapter on chaos in my book, which is not only of the order of the open, so it will be possible to speak about it, but it is not lots developed in this lecture. But I'm completely against now this conception of the open. In fact, if you say that we are open, if someone is sick, for example, in schizophrenia or in psychotic illness, Henri Maldinet, for example, or Bieswanger, they will say that you were open and now you are closed. So I think that if you are thinking like that, you presuppose what does it mean to be open. You presuppose what does it mean to be a human being. So my hypothesis in that book is that is the fact that we can't say that we are open and then we are closed, but in the case of a trauma, I'm completely transformed, and I never can come back to what I was before, but I began someone completely different. So it is this chaos, no happen, as Martin Heidegger. So it is this chaos. It's not only the order to the open, l'ouvert, as Martin Heidegger was able to understand, starting with Hesiod in his course on Nietzsche in 1936, in Nietzsche, the concept of chaos. But, and it is now my way, we change between, there is a transformation between the wedding piece of the lamp and the extra phenomenon, but which is also above all a matter to the full, and not the empty, to the full of the mixture, of the pell-mell, or of the crushed, as Nietzsche was able to define it himself from Anaxagoras, and not from Hesiod as Heidegger, philosophy of the tragic age of the Greek, in his summer course in 1872. The full, or the mixture, what Kant called das Gefühl der Empfindungen, mix of sensation, which is a translation in French, in English, close to the translation, crowd of phenomena, transmet Paco, or mass of phenomena. Such will be the different translation to designate in the Critique of the Pure Reason the coup de grâce that Cinnabar will deal to the very possibility of synthesizing and therefore the analogies of experience as such. So, after this introduction about what does it mean, thinking the unthinkable, so the question of the extra phenomenon, I will begin with the hello barbarity, or perhaps the better title could be the barbarity in hello, la barbarie encre. I will see it with Stephen later. Everything, therefore, begins with Kant, and that's good in our post-Kantian seminar, of course. At least insofar as today's context of hermeneutics and phenomenology is concerned, with the table of category, which accordingly one can certainly see whether it, by an attempt at radicalization, Heidegger, the place of disproportion, Ricoeur, and the operation of an inversion, Marion. It's very astonished, but I constated when I wrote the book, that in fact the same text is commented in three different ways, which is the text of Kant's text about the table of categories, and Paul Ricoeur show that, Martin Heidegger show that it is the way of the radicalization, in a way that it is a place of finitude. In Ricoeur, about fallibility, it is a place of disproportion, and in Marion, it is a place of the saturated phenomenon as an inversion of the categories. It means that it is very important to speak about those categories, even if, in my way, I will try to think outside the categories. So it's not radicalization for disproportion or inversion. So many stages impossible to develop here will lead to what we call here the fourth dimension of the phenomenon, the fourth dimension, which is the phenomenon, initiated by Kant himself with the hypothesis of Cinnabar, and of which apex will become the rule. But then it is still necessary to understand what is involved with the so-called analogy of experience in order to show how the earth in the critique of pure reason, it is also a question of reaching the limits of phenomenality, which is the subtitle of my book, The Extra Phenomenon, Confond la Vérité, according to a possibility of the impossible, or rather an impossibility of possibility, which we could be remiss to forget. In contrast to the simple dark night of John of the Cross, still awaiting light, we must oppose the other night, l'autre nuit, or pure night, la pure nuit, of Maurice Blanchot, who omitted the very idea of light. The idea of light does not exist anymore. So the pure night is absolutely not obscurity. And it means that in the case of a trauma, you fall in the poor night. If you lost a child, if you receive the news that you have a concert, it is a poor night. It means that nothing can happen anymore because the possibility of that something happen disappears. So the thing which is the worst thing for you is not that something else could happen, which is become worst, but the worst thing for you is that nothing can happen to you because the possibility to receive something better or worse have been destroyed. So unlike the mystery, the or phenomenon, but the extra phenomenon is instead defined by an impenetrable core and not mystery. And I will speak of the core of solitude and not the mystery of solitude at the end of the book, which means that nothing is to be expected or awaited except a new capacity to link or to invent, rather than finding a capacity for synthesis, as with the liaison or open, or the open, for example. We will never recover from the crisis by returning to the past, but by inventing the new capacities of synthesize. So Nietzsche will be the relay of Kant. It is thus in or low, that one must read Kant's Critique in order to see what it does not say, or of what it says little to see what it truly says. It's okay. It's okay for everyone? You can follow? There is no phenomenon, thus, no appearance of the world without the capacity for synthesis and thus a connection between analogy and experience, that is to say, and we will return to this, between a table of principle, what is a priori in Kant, and a given, which is a posteriori in Kant, of which I am capable of linking and relinking in time. It's okay. The condition is indeed, therefore, at least in Kant's view, for some things to appear to me, or for a phenomenon to be given as such. First, that all phenomena contain something permanent, which is substance, principle of permanence in the first analogy experience. Next, that, so I quote the analogy experience in Kant, everything that happens suppose something to which it succeeds to according to a rule, which is the principle of production. And finally, that all the substances are synonymous in universal community, which is the principle of community. Said otherwise, and this is precisely what the Cinnabar, or the analogy of experience, produce if some being were to seek to appear to subject without responding to the principle of permanence, something that abides, of production, seeing succeeds in another time, or of community, things interact among each other, there would then only remain what I call a pure chaos or confusion in the double impossibility of a synthesis, both on the side of the phenomenizing subject and the phenomenalized horizon, not corresponding to the analogies of experience is neither experience. It is the difference between me and Lacoste, for the people who know Lacoste, because in Lacoste, the unexperience, there is always an experience of the non-experience. It means that there is always an experience. In my way, there is no more experience in the case of the trauma. So you can't speak about the non-experience, the experience of the non-experience. Because when you speak about the non-experience of the experience, there is always an experience, which is completely destroyed in the case of the extra phenomenon. So the a priori of the trauma, illness, separation, death of a child, natural catastrophe, or pandemic, is such that it breaks all the laws of the a priori, the possibility of being and of being together, of course, but also of knowing and recognize oneself in an absolutely fixed identity. Man exists only by being constantly metamorphosized. Of course, there's a link between this question of metamorphose, or what I call hyper-transformation in an only philosophical way in the extra-phenomenal, and what I call metamorphosis in a theological way by resurrection in the metamorphosis of finitude. But I have to work on that point and to explain it more than I did until now, which is what Cinnabar leads to such an extent that a man who sometimes is transformed into an animal, sometimes into another. This point is very interesting because it is exactly what Deleuze said, in fact. Recalling here, or rather anticipating, the becoming animal of man for Franz Kafka in the Metamorphosis, which is a very important text in my book, and the becoming human of the animal, the investigation of dog, as reread by Gilles Deleuze for the example. To deny the analogy of experience is to let the world collapse and ourselves think with it until new capacities of synthesis are invented or perhaps created. So everything what I say are very important today because I wrote this book during the pandemic and it was a complete crisis. Nobody more in Paris, nobody more in New York. It was absolutely incredible. And I was completely alone in my office. And in this crisis, I saw that I have to think, what does it mean, a crisis? And instead to speak always about what after the crisis, as Swaziland see, we have to think that crisis broke everything. So, in order, therefore, to follow Kant exactly, here, in the analytic of concept, the synthesis or the act of linking at ends of making an analogy enable bringing about a unity of the diverse given intuition, not first in the experience, but in the knowing function itself. The conditions of synthesis are thus a priori, before being a posteriori. It is in me, said Kant, and not in the things that I establish a connection among them. I quote Kant, I mean by synthesis, as Kant defined in the act of adding various representations to each other and of understanding their diversity in a knowledge. Transcendental logic as science of the principle of pure source thus defines a number of a certain category of quantity. So that is, it is a lot of commented by Ricoeur in his book about fallibility. So quantity, unity, plurality, and totality, quality, reality negation, reality, and modality. It is used by Marion Trou in the extra phenomenon, by which we establish in ourselves the connection between the understanding and the thing through the schematism of the imagination. In short, to put it differently, the binding, Verbindung, less so in the experience that in the who constitute, and experience the experience. This is well known, as the famous phrase of the preface of the second edition of the Critic puts it, it's very well known, I quote Kant, we only know things a priori, what we put into them ourselves. So, what can we say about this interpretation? Kant knows it, and his readers too. He is a work, certainly, and first of all, of the system, and not the fragment of construction, and not destruction, of synthesis more than rupture, of course. But nevertheless, there are also holes in the canvas. What is my interpretation? Of fragility in the concept. Or even the possibility of that the whole architectonic of integration might collapse. Better still, construction is in reality a mode of prudence in the face of the fear of being annihilated, like Leibniz's Theodicy. In my eyes, it is very clear. Which only construct an explanation, even a disqualification of evil in the face of the destruction of whose by the 1755 Lisbon earthquake after Leibniz. But the philosopher of Königsberg see it too, or at least as an intimation of it. And confessions are not rare. For those who knows how to read and find them, of metaphysics barbarism or anarchy, against which the critic only struggles and hollows out, lets them be recognized at the ending of suit. Thus opened the first edition of the Critic, in case we had forgotten. And I quote this incredible quotation of Kant at the beginning of his critique of the purism. Under the administration of the dogmatics or government was at first despotic, but insomuch as the legislation still bore trace of the ancient barbarism, here empire gradually through intestine wars gives way to complete anarchy, and the sceptic, a species of nomads, with a horror of all seated modes of life, broke up from time to time all civil society. It doesn't seem to be Kant, but it is. Barbarism, Gilles Deleuze saw that. Barbarism, intestine wars, complete anarchy, species of nomad, a horror of all settled of mode of life, breaking the social bond. Is it really the critique of the purism as we know it, or think we do? Is there no, in the hollow reading of the critic, the fullness of a revolt that he hardly dares to confess? Beneath the cosmetic suit of the systematic, and also even the analogical, is there not the chaotic conflict of resistance more than givenness? And there is a chapter in the extra-phenomenology, resistance of the presence, because for me, resistance is first and not gift. Excuse me, of givenness, of the anti-experience, so prefer to say an experience, of the an experience more than the experience of the disruption of synthesis more than its unity. There is one who has seen in an exemplary fashion what Gilles Deleuze named in his support of the conscient opening nomadology or nomadic thought. There is Nietzsche in Kant. As Heidegger also suggests, it's very surprisingly. In his Nietzsche course, we're relating the chaos to the mixture of sensation, what I called before, and here nomadic thought amount to reprojecting daybreak onto the critic, to paradoxically applying what Nietzsche himself said of his own work to Kant, who does not say it but nevertheless thinks it, or at the very least does it. And I quote here Nietzsche in Horror, Daybreak. In this book, Daybreak, we find the subterranean being at work, one of those who drill, who undermine, who mine. One sees it, provided one has eyes for such a deep work. One totally unlearns silence when, as long as it was, one was a mole, one was alone. More work, undermining work. Isn't it the case that Nietzsche himself was a good reader of Kant and would have been of Deleuze after him? Would it not be that the heavy Cinnabar, sometimes red, sometimes black, sometimes light, sometimes heavy, hovers on the horizon of our representation, events are known the beginning, or rather the result of a collapse of all our efforts of synthesis, of our intimate conviction of always having, and as if in advance, the ability to link analogy of experience. This is indeed the case, first of all, in the transcendental dialectic of Kant's critique. I quote, "Let us occupy ourselves now with a work less brilliant, but which, however, is not devoid of merit. I mean to clear away of strangeness, to raise there the majestic edifice of morality, the ground wherein run all species of more ores that reason, in search of its treasure, dug without profit, despite its good intention, and which threaten the solidity of the building to be built." So, you see, in fact, Kant is near the catastrophe if we read it in that way. So after this first point, the barbarity in Hello, the question of the two critics in Kant, why Kant rewrite his critics? Why Kant developed two versions of its critics, one in 1781 and one in 1788? In my mind, it is because he has been so afraid by the Cinnabar that he suppressed it in his second edition of the Critique of the Pure Reason, because it is so heavy to see the extra phenomenon and to bear it in our thought. So, second point, it's okay for all of you? Yes? So, second point, between critics. You follow the text. What then, and what happened in Cinnabar, an exemplary more whole, the or phenomenon, the extra here, the extra phenomenon, which render and phenomenizing impossible, the or experience, which breaks apart the thread of synthesis or connection, the unthinkable, which undermines the very idea of thought. Better, did not the philosopher of Königsberg, Kant the man, shudder before the abyss he had suddenly opened and discovered, before his own Cinnabar, before the absolute extra, faced with the impossibility of possibility, extra phenomenon, even was the possibility of impossibility, infra of supra phenomenon. So in my book, I explain that you are first the possibility of impossibility. The possibility of impossibility is, for example, the anguish of death in Martin Heidegger. Was the anguish of death of Martin Heidegger the possibility of impossibility? Because it is the possibility that nothing could happen anymore. So the anguish of death is the end of any project. It is a possibility of the impossibility. But there is something which is more tragic as the possibility of the impossibility is the impossibility of possibility. Because what happened in the case of the death of a child, what happens in the case of a trauma, it is the idea of possibility which is destroyed. So the impossibility of possibility means that there is no possibility anymore. So, for example, it is, for example, to be a survival and not to be in life. When I'm thinking about the anguish of death, I am always in life, thinking about the end of my life. Oh, it's tragic, but not so much. You are a philosopher in your office, and you are thinking about the anguish of death. But where you are thinking, where something happens to you that you can't think anymore, even in your office, because something happened to you that you are completely broke, in that case, you are in the impossibility of possibility. What does the second edition, so I come back to the text, what does the second edition of the Critique of the Pure Reason itself substitute the synthesis of the I think on the origin synthetic of perception, where the first edition in 1781 expressed in original and incisive fashion of the impossibility of Cinnabar on the synthesis of proposition in imagination. Could it be that in the gap between the two editions of the first critique, one read the first retreat or recall from chaos? Did Kant have been afraid by the chaos or by his own Cinnabar? Better, the second critique, the critique of the practical reason. So now I compare so first I spoke about the difference between the two editions of the first critique in 1781 and 1787. And now I want to say a few words about the difference between the first critique and the two other critiques, to show you that the two other critiques are another manner to be in retreat in front of the Cinnabar. Better, the second critique, the critique of the practical reason in 1787. Is it a good date? I'm not sure. With the moral law inscribed in me in my heart, and the third critique, the critique of the judgment with the sublime, Are not these really attempts to doct what the first version of the first critic had seen, the extra-phenomenal, that we change the page. Okay, we are the next page. Sometimes red, sometimes black, sometimes light, sometimes heavy. The man, sometimes mind, sometimes animal, and so on. The matter is now sufficiently clear to be affirmed. The entire itinerary of Kant, the second and third critique, only confirms the avoidance of Cinnabar of the extra phenomenon initiated from the outset, and the first difference between the first and second edition of the first critique. Whether we welcome or we regret it, we don't have to develop any judgment about it. Kant's work, or would be, a form of flight from Cinnabar, including the analogies of experience, the second of the third critique, the categorical imperative, the second critique, or the sublime, the third critique, that all take over. Implicitly following the philosopher of Königsberg, this gesture of flight will be reiterated in an annihilation of the word that can still be targeted in Husserl, or again the retreat before the region of unthinkable or Heidegger. Well, I can't develop it now, because in fact, Husserl and Heidegger did exactly what Kant did. Husserl, when he's speaking about in Eden 1, when Husserl spoke about the hypothesis of the annihilation of the world, he said, but even if the world was annihilated, we always have a view on it, intentionality on it, as said Grieker when he commented this text. So it means that the annihilation of word is not a true annihilation because I can't see it. And it is the same in Heidegger, because when Heidegger developed his argumentation on Nietzsche, it's very interesting, on the blackboard, he said that if I see some sign on the blackboard, if I don't understand what the sign means, I understand that there are signs. So there are always signs, there are always phenomena for me. It is exactly what I contest. So it means that in Kant, in the Cinnabar, which has been changed in the second edition of the Critique of the Pure Reason, and in Husserl, in the hypothesis of the annihilation of the word, and in Heidegger, when he spoke about the hypothesis of the sign of the blackboard and saying always that there are phenomena for me, all the three, in fact, are the same situation as Kant. It means a sort of flight from Cinnabar. So, to use the language of photography, there is no off-camera in the critical enterprise as in phenomenology, at least in its beginning, since the focal orientation of the lens always remains the same. Within the horizon's openness, one will certainly find the infraphenomenal, the moral, and the supraphenomenal, but not the truly extra-phenomenal. The field or the horizon shattered by the trauma, illness, separation, disorder, child, natural disaster, or pandemic, makes nothing to appear, even the very possibility of appearing. It is not the transcendental which is implicitly prepared, the life word, in Merleau-Ponty, for example, or explicitly overworld, or even inverted, the saturated phenomenon in Marion, for example. But the transcendental, which properly speaking is broken or shattered, the very idea of condition of possibilities become impossible. The or phenomenon, or the impossibility of possibility, Cinnabar, neutral, there is, outside. So, there is Levinas, outside is Deleuze, etc. Radicalize and breaks the possibility of impossibility, the capacity to still suffer, still to die, still to feel. That's why I criticize the concept of auto-affection in missionary. And if some of you will be present during the Gilson chair, because I'm preparing the Gilson chair in March, but it is in French. I will criticize missionary, and I wrote this passage today, because missionary always saw in in Men de Biran a sort of auto-affection. So it is always affection. But what does it mean for Men de Biran too to be outside of any affection? And in fact, Men de Biran spoke about that because he founded a society which is a medical society of Bergerac. And this medical society, he developed the case of madness, of sleeping, of drugs, and so on, to be outside of myself. Perhaps there are cases when where I can't feel myself anymore. So I quote now the situation, a quotation of a text I published in English too, which is Mal et finitude. Such apathy or indifference to living affects not only prisoners who experience actually limits among certain beings, but also our most daily being there, of he agrees to descend at the bottom of the abyss at the open chaos kaino, which is constitute. So, are you always there? Okay, Stephen, how long do I have now? Perhaps I comment my text. What do I have to do?
Well, so my understanding was you said you have a dinner engagement at 7 your time.
Yes.
So by my count, you would have about an hour and 5 minutes left.
How many?
What's now 12 p.m. my time.
Okay. So I will just comment the end of my text for comment or read the passage, for we will have time to speak. Okay. It is the end of my text, which is very important too. So I comment. First, for the third point, the return of synthesis. So what I explain is this paragraph. I explain that even Kant thought about this rupture and synthesis, and then he developed fourth point, the question of the Cinnabar, where the Cinnabar is coming from. I will stop. I will just read the text. One will certainly think. It is before.
Just tell me when. Sorry, tell me when to stop.
Wait. Continue. Before. Yes. No. It was one will. No. Before. No. Go up. It is page 9, but I don't know. There is no number of your page, but it is page 9 of your text. If you have the page. No, you don't have the page.
What section is it in?
Yeah, here we are. Okay. One will certainly think. So the question is, what is a Cinnabar? Because, and I did a research for myself to say, what does it mean, Cinnabar? And why I can't use this example? So it is only a suggestion I made, but in fact, nobody made any PhD or any on this question, but it will be very interesting. And it is a point not developed by the conscience specialists. One will certainly think, and possibly for Kant, of a reminiscence of Cinnabar in all painting, such as could be seen, for example, in the Vermillion's Raid, or the Virgin, the Child Jesus, and Saint Anne's by Leonardo da Vinci, and famously emphasized in the figure of the vulture, which is despised by Freud. So it should be good for Tim to do a video, because Tim, you will have to give the link for the video, because he did make a fantastic video on my work with painting. You are here, and this point is very interesting to see that the Cinnabar could be in the Vermillon Raid of the Virgin, of the Child Jesus, Saint Anne. One can also, and perhaps, refer to Cinnabar as it is experienced in antiquity. So Kinnabarinos appears for the first time in Aristotle's History of Animals, and that of Kinnabri appears in its Meteora. We will then name Kinnabri, Cinnabaris, or Cinnabron, someone turn red or Cinnabar, so it's me who developed that, to such an extent that we would no longer recognize him, since so much shame has transformed or disfigured his face. Far from a simple coincidence of opposites, it is in entity itself that it is disqualified. But Kant's word Cinnabar probably more so refers to the surgeon Ambroise Paré. Cinnabar is also now a precious stone, and one of my colleagues, Jérôme de Gramont, he has at home in his apartment a Cinnabar. It is a stone, a vermilion stone too. So, Kant's word Cinnabar probably most refer to the surgeon Ambroise Paré and to the chemist Antoine Lavoisier, who is exactly contemporary. Exactly. From Paré, he co-retained the bad vapor or quicksand sulfur that Cinnabar omits when it burns. The nauseating smell, so it's good for Cinnabar, nauseating smell makes unclear its source, and from what is vapor is drawn. From Lavoisier, he very likely knows about the discovery of the mercury sulfide, that is Cinnabar, whose particularity consists precisely in its capacity to change color when crystallized. Cinnabar, vermilion, red color in the hexagonal system. Metacinnabar, black, so Cinnabar in chimie, comme un black in color, crystallized the separate system. Sometimes red, sometimes black. So Cinnabar simply can thus be in the chemistry example, but on the condition of it being considering in a differential system, which is precisely the organization of chaos or the manner of sensation contest at the change color illustrated. In short, and we have understood it despite the few mentions and comments that we can find regarding the nature and the deep meaning of this Cinnabar, in particular for Kant. Cinnabar, for Kant, Cinnabar is not simply the color red as in itself only, but can also designate one who becomes red as if red, at the least in the 18th century. Cinnabar does not dispute the opposition of the contrary property of the object, red and black, heavy and light, but gleams the possible unimaginable decomposition of the object, even of the subject, in the trial in which he lost himself, for example, in the dark red, heavy and deep of shame or anger. I become Cinnabar, me we speak about it, when I do not manage or no longer manage to operate the synthesis of sensation and understanding by the schematics of imagination, rather than aiming or imagining, still being able to Cinnabar without feeling affected by it or even annihilated. Like Oedipus and Blood, Cinnabar kills and permanently blinds the one who aims at it. If one gets too close to it, one's eyes will be burned beyond repair. So, I will continue or finish now later at the point of as mingling of sensation. So you can continue. It is a C as mingling of sensation. Continue. Yeah, here. And a big up. The paragraph just before. Continue. Up. Stop. Just before. Stop. Hence. And as if by backlash in a framework of the or phenomenon, this time, the question that dopes itself. If Cinnabar, or even burnout, the crack up or the breakdown, that's why I wanted to read this text, this passage, because you don't have to think Cinnabar only as a Cinnabar color. What does that mean, Cinnabar? It is an existential situation, which is a burnout, the crack up or the breakdown, where to shatter both the phenomenological subject and the phenomenological horizon, what would happen then the energy of experience that could never constitute themselves, nor constitute me, in that the apostolic shock of the fourth term, the trauma destroyed in a rule, said differently, and following the example expressed by Heidegger by connecting chaos and mêlée des sensations, but we say what is the mêlée des sensations? So, what is now the mingling of sensation? Just a few minutes. It's okay? I continue? Yes? Like, like the chaos,
Go ahead.
it's okay, 2 minutes more. Like the chaos or the or phenomenon of Anaxagoras, preferred therefore and resolved by Nietzsche to the chaos or to open of Hesiod elected by Heidegger, the melee of sensation in Kant makes the choice of the full rather than of the empty, of the mass of the phenomena that disturb and sometimes destroys us, rather than of the excess that overflows us and delight us. And you understand that all the French philology is a philology of the excess, of the supra-phenomenal, or the German phenomenology is a phenomenology of the preparation of the phenomenon, the infra-phenomenon, the fluent consciousness, the withdrawal, and me, I develop a phenomenology of the extra-phenomenon, which is not the excess, of course. So, okay. So this mass of phenomena, in its density, confusion, mixture, for us who receive it to the point of annihilating capacity of receive, signifies resistance more than giving, the extra phenomenon rather than the infra phenomenon. We have already said so, but it is fitting now to return to it. It is not a question of the pre-experience, Merleau-Ponty, as we have said, nor of over-experience, Marion, or even inexperience as good, or the experience of inexperience, Lacoste, but properly an experience. Here it's good, Stephen, not anti, good. of non-experience, in that the very idea of the experiencing something is by itself abolished in the trauma of an event that definitely breaks the transcendental, or the very possibility of horizon where there is still a sense to constitute. The unity of the empirical synthesis were completely contingent. Kant states boldly in this famous ab absurdum theory of following argument of Cinnabar, I continue, and if these concepts did not result of the transcendental principle of unity, it will be possible that a mangling of sensation, Gefühl der Empfindungen, fills our soul without it ever resulting experience. It is here, in this chaos, or in this melee of mangling of sensation, we refer to it only exactly of what Heidegger will translate in his example of the tableau noir. So, conclusion now, it will be the conclusion. I am soothed. What does that mean? It is a conclusion. I will not read the conclusion of the text, it will be too long. At the limit of the unthinkable, and therefore of the impossibility of making analogy, that is to say, of connecting or synthesizing the a priori categories and the a posteriori experience, the subject finds himself in a way annihilated, what I call desubjectivated, before to be cornered, acculé, hypersubjectivated, then modified, subjectivation. So my hypothesis in the extra phenomenon is not that the subject is completely destroyed and the story is finished. I'm not saying as Foucault, I'm not speaking as Foucault about the disparition of the subject. I say at the end breast that if the subject is as it was completely destroyed, and I am in myself because of a trauma, for example, the death of my child, of a child, then I am a corner to myself. I am hyper-subjectivated because I am always present. I am always here. And it is what crisis significates. What is to be in crisis? It is to be always here, even if I would prefer to not be here anymore. Why? Even sometimes for the pandemic, for some people, why are we always present, even if we thought that we would disappear? And then that's why we are completely modified, which is Kafka. So in the pure contradiction of existence, or in the opposite of contradictories, which entails that we ourselves can no longer endure or create an event, illness, separation, the devil child, natural disaster, or pandemic, but also the Cinnabar, sometimes red, sometimes black, sometimes light, sometimes heavy, or even a man who turns sometimes to an animal, sometimes to another. I quote Kant. The subject is therefore seen and, in a way, suffocated by his suit, to be sure, but also in his very capacity to think, empty of himself and not open. In an impossibility of stepping back before the or phenomenon and become both open-mouthed and stunned by the very fact of what he never thought could or should happen to him. Once it has been established, or at least recognized as a given, that the unthinkable is not the unthinkable, that analogy is somehow disqualified, and that one can no longer aim at chaos or maintain the a priori of phenomenality, there is no other choice but to descend ever further into the abyss and to exercise further. Indeed, perhaps it could happen that our thoughts are no longer recognized as ours or mine, and that the subject himself is so desubjectified that he is totally lost what we usually call his identity. I have no more identity. Spinoza quoted a very interesting experience of the poetry Gongora and Ethics. It is in the books 4. When he spoke about the poet Gongora, in fact, he has an Alzheimer, but of course, Spinoza didn't know the name of the illness. And he said that Gongora changed completely in his nature. He changed completely in his substance. He was absolutely not the same because of his illness, because nobody can't recognize him, and it was impossible for him to be recognized by himself. It is a case of the extra phenomenon, which is completely different, for example, of the saturated phenomenon. When something overcomes of me, I am always in life and I can receive it, even if it is a part of it. As I said during a lecture, it was a conference in the Sorbonne 1 month ago, I said French theology is good when you are okay, when you are in a good health, because everything is good for you: the face, the odor, the gift, the word, the prayer, and so on. But what happened in the case of a tragic phenomenon? It is not only the inverse of the saturated phenomenon. It is something else, something which happened, which has never been prepared, infraphenomenon, which can't overcome of me, saturated phenomenon, because I'm completely destroyed by what happened. And that's why I'm completely alone in what happened. And what I explained, that there is only in the Holy Saturday, if you are interested in philosophy of religion, that God can be present with me. Because except God, I am always alone, and the other is near me in my trauma, but never with me in my trauma. But I didn't develop it here. I conclude. My suit. So my suit are not your suit. It is a quotation of Isaiah chapter 55, verse 8. It does not apply simply the others, or even to the worldly other, who supposedly always overwhelms me to justify my continual escape into eternity, which is the biblical interpretation, of course. The formula, for me, also refers paradoxally to the anonymity of my suit, which I no longer recognize as mine following the trauma. My suit, I know your suit, my suit. Not only do I not think, or no longer think, but if I were to think, perhaps I would not recognize myself in this suit, nor in the way they arrived. A suicidal suit, certainly, but why not also a simple idea which passed through my head, but of which I do not identify the author or the recipient? My thoughts does not belong to me, not because they come from an elsewhere that justifies them, but because they sometimes dissociate themselves from me, in that I do not recognize myself in them, or analogy, I survive in the crisis, and this is what I makes my life. There is thus something that destroys my thought, confides Anton Artaud. I hope you read Anton Artaud, of course, in his letter to Jacques Rivière, dated January 23 in 1924. Anton Artaud is for philosophy exactly what Van Gogh was for painting. Of course, completely mad, but he explained to us what does it mean to be destroyed by our thoughts. Here is what he wrote to Jacques Rivière, because Jacques Rivière disagreed to publish his poems. Sometimes something that does not prevent me from being what I could be, but leaves me, if I may say, in suspense, and something that progressively destroys in its substance the mass of my thought, I beg you, admit the reality of these phenomena. What we have to do in philology too now, after the COVID and so on, and because of the war of Ukraine and so on. It's not enough to speak only about the gift and so on, in my mind. And what better way to relay it, or rather to precede it, that the On me pense of Arthur Rimbaud, Letters of Voyant, to George Isambard, this time dated May 13, 1871. I quote, is very well known. I is another. Is not only, it is always interpreted like that, but it's not right. It's not the index of the destitution of any form of egoism, and even less the only desperate call to alterity, but rather the confession of a radical neutrality. It happens sometimes, and according to the exemplary case of the or phenomenon of phenomenology today, where one becomes other to oneself, it is my thesis, rather than other oneself, other than oneself, this Husserl thesis, or on oneself as another, which is Ricoeur's thesis. Rimbaud's right, and I will finish on this quotation. Now I'm getting as much as I can scratch. Why? I want to be a poet, and I work to make myself clairvoyant. You will not understand at all, and I will hardly be able to explain it to you. It is a question of arriving at the unknown by the eruption of all the sense. These sufferings are enormous, but one must be strong, be born a poet, and I recognize myself as a poet. It is not my fault at all. It is wrong to say, I think. I should say, I am thought. Pardon the pun. I is another. So much the worse for the wood that finds itself a violin and taunts the unconscious who quibble about what they are completely unaware of. So I finish it. Thanks.
Thank you, Emmanuel. There is so much to discuss, and thankfully, I think we have a decent amount of time to do so. Okay. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is to turn the forum over to those in the audience who may have a question. Just feel free to unmute yourself, say hello, and ask Emmanuel your question, and we can have a discussion.
Just I go 5 minutes to drink a glass of water.
Okay, yeah, we'll just take a few minutes, and when Emmanuel comes back, we'll open with questions. I should mention also, if you want, you can pose your question in the chat, and I can just read the question as well. That's also an option. Right, you're back.
Yes, I'm back. Tim is here. Tim,
I think.
I think no, it's not here because I have a suggestion. Perhaps he could put. We're waiting for him. He could put in the chat. You see, you see the videos, the 2 videos we did, and
Oh, right, yeah.
I think it should be good if when he will come back, we'll ask him to do it in the chat if he can do it.
Well, when other people gather their thoughts, I have a question. So you mentioned Husserl's ideas 1, and you mentioned the famous stretch of text when Husserl imagines the annihilation of the world. And you're distinguishing your position from his, and you also do so in reference to Heidegger when you mention the possibility of the impossibility of constituting a phenomenon. And then you say, well, but you're not adopting a position that's equivalent to Foucault's, because you're not saying that the subject is annihilated or completely destroyed. So do you have a term then for what you would call this form of subjectivity that you're trying to get at?
Yeah. So thanks for this question. It is an important one in the book. So I think that in fact, Husserl, Kant did exactly what Leibniz did, and Husserl did exactly what Kant did, and Heidegger did exactly what Husserl did. What does it mean? It means that first, when Leibniz is speaking about theodicy, in fact, it is because he has fear of the chaos. It is a flight of the chaos. And what Husserl, in this very important paragraph, I think it's 54, if I don't make a mistake, of the ideal one about the annihilation of the world, something remain. And what remain in Husserl? The ego. As you know, as said Husserl, it's possible. Yes, sure. You put the because and you have this because Tim. We spoke with Stephen. We suggest with Stephen that you put in the chat the 2 link of the 2 video you did, because in the second one and the second one I spoke a lot. I said it just this morning because you sent it to me yesterday. I spoke a lot about the trauma and the extra phenomenon, and your video was absolutely fantastic. Yeah. So put the 2 link for the people who wants to see it, because you did the work. I'll
do that.
Incredible work. Thanks for the work.
Thank you.
So, so yes. So first, for Husserl, it's very clear that the subject remains, and as you know, and I explained, you can put in brackets everything, even God, because God is in brackets, and it is a point which is contested by Ricoeur in his preface. In the edition of the one in French, but the ego, the subject, can't be put in brackets. It is exactly what I contest, in fact. And Husserl said that when I see, if I can make the hypothesis of the annihilation of the world, I am always here to make this hypothesis. That is a point I contest, because sometimes I can't say I am always here, but I am always here in the absolute impossibility to watch something, the impossibility to have any intentionality, even of the nothingness. And so and for Heidegger, that's right, and I developed the example of Heidegger in the Wedding Feast of the Lamb, because it is the first moment when I discover this question of chaos. For Heidegger, when he developed this hypothesis, very interesting, in his course on Nietzsche in 1936, he developed the question of the chaos in Nietzsche. And so he did an hypothesis, and this hypothesis is the case if you are coming in a classroom, and you see some signs on the blackboard, but you don't understand what are the signs. Perhaps because it is Chinese, but perhaps it means nothing. But it will be always signs for you. And the question of the chaos is, what does it mean if it was no more science? What does it mean for an animal, for example? And when Heidegger asked to himself this question, he said, it will not be a phenomena, and he closed. So the question is, how is it possible for us to see face to face what the unthinkable means, even if it is, of course, impossible to think about what is unthinking means. I will just develop a point which will interest the people who are with us. In June, during the Einpair conference, Stephen, you were not present, I don't think. This was not possible. So I was with Marion, and we have a discussion at the end of my conference. So at the end of my conference, we spoke, and we are very friendly, and I know him very well. And he read The Extra Phenomenon, and he read the book. He said it's a very good book, but he disagreed, of course, with his book. And when I was the first time I met him with his book, I gave him the book in my hand, with my hands, and I told him, I'm a bit like Heidegger, who gives to Husserl Being and Time. It means a good book in philosophy, but you will completely disagree with it. It was exactly the case. But at the end of his lecture, I gave my lecture before. He said, at the end, he said, and there is nothing outside the phenomena. There is nothing outside the phenomena. And he said, Falque is looking for the reduction. He didn't find it. Well, and then it was a bit of a form of provocation. And then I took the micro. I was near Daniel Cohen-Levinas, which is the family of Levinas. And I said to Jean-Luc, how is it possible to say that the extra phenomenon does not exist? Because if you speak about it, it's not extra anymore. I told him, we are coming back in the years of the 1820s, when Freud, doing the rejection to Freud and to the consciousness to Freud, when some medicine told him, in fact, it is not, you can speak about unconsciousness because when you speak about it, it's not unconscious anymore. Then I continue the story because it is a bit funny and we are here for that. 1 week after, I was cooking at home and Jean-Luc phoned to me and told me, Emmanuel, I wanted to tell you that our debate about the extra phenomenon already happened. So I told him, oh, so it exists. I said, but perhaps. And he told me, this debate has been developed by Eugène Fink and Husserl in the appendix of a paragraph of the crisis, the appendix 24, about consciousness. So then I gave a lecture in Sorbonne 1 month ago, which was the l'inconscient phénoménologique, the physical unconsciousness. And what I showed, and some specialists of Husserl told me that I was not completely wrong. I showed that effectively Eugène Fink explained that it was absolutely impossible to speak about unconsciousness in phenomenology because it does not appear, and the phenomenology is what appears, of course. But so, and he told, I want to defend Husserl, my master. But in fact, when you read the manuscript of Husserl, and especially the manuscript of the synthesis analysis, you can see that in fact Husserl spoke about the degree zero, the degree zero, the all degrees of affection. It means that for Husserl, it's very clear that perhaps the extra phenomenon exists, but we can find it only in his manuscript, just published at the end of the 20th century and translated in French very early and very late just now. But it's clear that in all the French phenomenology, this question of the limit of consciousness are not erased. And why? Because except Paul Ricoeur, there is no more discussion with psychoanalysis. And why is there no more discussion with psychoanalysis? because, in my mind, it's exactly what I was writing today about my conference about spiritualism, because it is the same. It is because of the distinction made by Martin Heidegger between ontic and ontologic. Of course, all the other disciplines, metaphysics, psychology, and so on, are ontics. And we are developing an ontological philosophy. So it has been pushed out. So to come back to your question, I think that what I discover in the Cinnabar is a constant, you can find many times in philosophy, and it's difficult to reach what I call the extra phenomenon. That's why I say that you'd never reach it. It is like wall on a cavern, and you can go only around the wall. You live with something, and that's why you are alone. If you lost a child, if you have been separated, if you are illness, in fact, there is like a wall in yourself. If you have a cancer, nobody can help you. Even your wife, even your husband, even your children, even your parents, they can be near you, but not with you. And it is what I call the core of solitude, which is not a mystery. A core because I am alone. But what does it mean to be in love with the other? It is not to share my solitude, but to recognize that it is impossible to share it. I love you because of our incommunicability. So it is absolutely the inverse of what we say. It doesn't mean that we can't communicate, absolutely, of course. But it means that, and when you are married since a long time, you know that you know that you don't have to speak with the other. You know exactly what's happened in itself, what's happened in myself, but it is impossible for me to reach it and for the other. And I love you because it's impossible for you to reach yourself and impossible for me to reach another. So it's exactly what, to finish, what Honorary said in his letter to a young poet. He said, love is the way of two solitudes who congratulate themselves, who see themselves, but not the capacity to share the solitude. Except for me, your cat is coming. Except for me, in the case of God in the Holy Saturday. And I wrote a text which is Dieu hors phénomène, God extra phenomenon, which is translated in English and published in English in GCTR. So God extra phenomenon. What does it mean? That is that only God in the Holy Saturday can be with us.
Yeah, that text is in the most recent issue of the Journal for Continental Philosophy, Religion. Yeah.
Okay,
let me ask you just more, because this relationship to psychoanalysis, you've written, for those who may not be aware, you've written a book on Freud and psychoanalysis, which was recently translated as Nothing to It. And you mentioned Freud and psychoanalysis in other texts of yours as well. Do you want to say something about the relationship between the psychoanalytic conception of the unconscious and how that relates to what you sometimes refer as chaos or the abyss? And what's the relationship between your previous remarks about the chaos and the abyss and this conception of the extra phenomenon? What's the relation between those two?
Oh, thanks. It's a good but a difficult question. A difficult question. Why? Because many people know it. My wife is psychoanalysis, and she's now in the garden 50 meters from me in his office with patient. Not my wife, is a psychoanalytic, and my mother too. Some people said it is a personal story. So it's not only a personal story, but this point is very important for me. So why? My way is absolutely not psychoanalytic. Why? Because the first difference, of course, between the philosopher and the psychoanalyst is the fact that I don't speak about particular stories, but I speak about humanity. That is first. The second point is the fact that there is a big difference between Nietzsche and Freud. And in fact, I'm more Nietzschean than Freudian. Why? And I said it a bit at the end of my book, Nothing to Eat, about Freud, because I finished on Nietzsche. Because in Freud, even it's so important, the libido is a sort of center of the pulsion. And in Nietzsche, there is no center of the pulsion. There is a plurality of pulsion. And the second point, which is a more important one, is the fact that in Freud, the libido is orientated. In consciousness is orientated to the consciousness. That's why I came back to the last Freud. Nothing to Eat is a translation of a very interesting title of the book in French, but complicated to translate it. Ça n'a rien à voir. Ça n'a rien à voir, nothing to eat, but it is impossible to see the ça. The ça is not the S, it's not exactly the nothing. So the relationship between the psychoanalysis is very important, even if, I finish on that point, the concept of the chaos is not the same as the concept of a consciousness. Why? First, because it is a concept which is coming from the Greek and not a new concept. And the second point, because in the concept of chaos, as you see, I have two concepts of chaos. The first concept of chaos I developed is the Hesiod one, which is quoted, of course, by Heidegger, which is the fact to be open on the abyss, because chaos is coming for Cain to be open. But my second concept of chaos, which is developed in the extra phenomenon, is not the same. The second concept of chaos is not to be open, it is to be plenty. I finish on that point. And I think that it is different of Freud on that point. So I think that there is something, perhaps if we can say it, more radical in the concept of chaos than in the concept of consciousness, because there is, how to say that, there is no resilience. And I am very severe about the concept of resilience or resiliency in my book. Why? Because we are always speaking about resilience, the necessity to be in resiliency. It means that even when you are a sportive, in a sport, he said, well, it doesn't mind if you fall. Mm-hmm. The only thing is to wake it up. All right. Mm-hmm. But it's not that. In fact, I have to stay in my trauma. So I don't spoke in my book about resiliency, but I spoke about the trauma. I said I have to be in la portance et la contenance. It's complicated in English. I don't know how to translate it because it has never been translated now. La portance, to be on the trauma, like a boat, and la contenance, to be in the trauma, to not explode. So for me, the resiliency is not first. That's why I explain in the book that if you are mad, you don't have to say that because you are mad, you have to come back to a situation where the people are not mad, because madness is a manner to be. Madness is a manner to be in the world. And perhaps madness can be a form of creativity, exactly in Nietzsche, exactly in Anton Artaud, exactly in Van Gogh, and so on. So that's why I always say that someone who is mad is different, only different, but not healthy is not a recovery of what we are.
Great, thank you. You've mentioned something now about psychoanalysis. Someone else you mentioned in this paper and throughout your work is Heidegger. And in a work like The Guide to Gethsemane, you take up this Heideggerian conception of finitude, and you try to give an account about how, in a way, Heidegger hasn't given us the final word on finitude. But I wonder if here today you want to say something about, of course, Heidegger had a little bit to say about psychoanalysis in the Zolliken seminars, but not much. How would you see what you're working out here in the with the extra phenomenon as what are its implications for Heidegger's understanding of phenomenology as an inquiry into the meaning of being? Do you think that what you're getting at here with the limits of sense or the limits of meaning with the extra phenomenon, how does that reformulate the question of being, or what does it mean for the question of being, or is it not, is it maybe not related to that question at all?
Thanks. In my mind, there is something absolutely more radical, the extra phenomenon, than infinitude. But I spent time to discover that. Why? Because in the case of finitude, there is a lot of meaning. There is a lot of significancy. I think that, in fact, all the phenomenology, the Husserlian one, the Heideggerian one, even the Merleau-Pontian one, and of course, all the French phenomenology, from Lévinas to Lacoste, stay in this sentence of Husserl, which is on the paragraph 16 of the Cartesian meditation, which is very important in my mind, a very important one, when he said, the first is the mute experience, l'expérience muette, which is waiting for coming to its own meaning, to its own signification. First, we have to stay in the mute experience. It is exactly what Merleau-Ponty said and what Merleau-Ponty did. It's not the case of the French phenomenology, because the mute experience is only the experience of body or the experience of childhood. Because what is a child, etymologically, infants, it is a child, non-fari, you don't speak, we can't speak, we don't speak. The child is the one who don't speak, but not the one who have to speak, the one who don't speak. So the mute experience is an essential point in phenomenology, and I think in the Merleau-Pontian phenomenology, and I think that my generation is Merleau-Pontian, and you showed it, as Barbaras, Romano, and so on, and that the Marion's generation is Husserlian, is Heideggerian, even if the Heideggers are different, exactly as Lacoste or Chrétien, and that the Michel-Henri generation, or even Ricoeur, is Husserlian. Me, I'm more Merleau-Pontian and the mute experience. But why? I took a turn, if I compare even to Merleau-Ponty. It is because in his sentence, Husserl said the first is a mute experience, okay, waiting to come to its own meaning, own signification. But I wait nothing. I do not wait to any signification. So, and that is a difference. That's why, for me, Merleau-Ponty stayed in the position, the infra-phenomenon, as Heidegger with the withdrawal, as Husserl with the fluke of consciousness, all the French philosophy in the extra, in the supra-phenomenal. But for me, we have to discover this new framework of the extra phenomenon, in which nothing appears anymore, because the conditions of apparition are being destroyed, exactly what we saw with the Cinnabar in Kant, and nothing can find any meaning or signification anymore, because the idea of signification disappeared. So what do we have to do? We are survival. We survive. We are not in life. We are in a sort of survival, survie. But in this form of life, which is to be in survival, we become completely different. That is the point. That's why when I spoke about the desubjectivation and hypersubjectivation and then transformation, metamorphosis. But in that case, it's the metamorphosis of myself, not the metamorphosis of God, as in metamorphosis of finitude. But why? Why? Because in fact, I can exist only as if I recognize that I've been completely transformed. If you are being separated with someone, if you lost a child, if you have a concert or something like that, you become someone else, someone completely different. Not you as another, but you completely other. Hein? Moi-même, autre à moi-même. Me, completely different of myself. So in that case, it is metamorphosis. Exactly the same as in Kafka, because in Kafka, the concrela, you have two possibilities. The first one is to see the concrela from the humanity, and you say he completely changed. He's not the same. Or the second possibility, and it is exactly what did Kafka in his novel, is to say that not he changed, but I changed. I can't recognize myself. I am not the same. And even if the end of the concrela is not a good one because he died, I think it is exactly our situation in the case of a trauma, which is illness, separation, death of a child, a natural disaster of pandemic.
Thank you. I want to ask a question about Chrétien and how your view differs from his with your idea of speech and call. But with an eye toward today's session wrapping up, I know you have to leave soon. I want to see if others may have a question that they want to ask. So now would be the time to do it. If you have a question.
10 minutes, 5 minutes more.
Yeah.
No question. Okay.
Looks like we have someone who has a question, maybe.
Hello.
Hi. Nice to meet you.
Where are you from? Where are you from?
I'm Hyeon Han. I'm studying for a PhD in philosophy of religion at Cambridge.
Okay.
It's a great honor to meet you via Zoom. And thank you for your astonishing lecture. And also, thank you for Professor Delay as well for organizing these lecture series and insightful translated versions. I know that you've written remarkable philosophical and theological works, including the Metamorphosis of the Finitude, Guide to the Gethsemane, and Living Struggle. And I was actually wondering that this work, Extra Phenomenon, is defined as one of the philosophical writings. Am I right in that sense?
Yeah. So thanks. Your question is a very good one, and it's complicated. It's a simple one, but complicated to respond. Why? I explain it to you. Many people told me that I was only a theologian, and now some people are saying to me, "You are only a philosopher." Why? Because this last book, which is the Extra Phenomenon, is only philosophical, not theological. Why? I don't know why. In fact, if you see the video sent by Tim Wu, and you have to see it, I explain in those videos that, in fact, you don't know at the beginning, I don't know at the beginning what I have to do. And I explain it in my book, just published by way of obstacle. I don't know if you know it. It has been published in English 1 month ago. And in this book, it's here. It's a book in English. Here, you can see it by way of obstacle.
Yes, I'm aware of it. Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
I didn't publish, and in that book, I explain. I explain by myself. It is sort of intellectual autobiography. And I explain that point, that in fact, I don't know at the beginning what I have to do. If you told me when I was writing the Guide to Gethsemane that I will write a book about resurrection, I will say never, because I don't believe in resurrection anymore. I spoke so much about death and anguish of death. If you spoke to me that I will write a book which is the Wedding Feast of the Lamb, after the book, I will say never. And what's happened? In fact, I wanted to write a book or something about the Holy Saturday. which is not only the Holy Friday, which is the Guide to Gethsemane, which is not only the Holy Thursday, which is the wedding feast of the Lamb, which is not only the Holy Sunday, which is a metamorphosis of finitude. So at the beginning, my question was theological, but and that's why I wrote that paper, which is God Extra Phenomenon. You can read it in English. But after, my question was, but what God is reaching in the Holy Saturday? And I discovered and I showed, but after writing the Extra Phenomenon, that the Holy Saturday is the moment, which is not the last judgment, is the moment when God is coming in our abyss. But our abyss is not seen, are not seen. It is a Sheol in the Jewish tradition, or the Hades in the Greek tradition. So it was just the beginning. And then because probably of something happened to me, probably, or because of the pandemic, because of the COVID, because I was completely alone in my office, that was good, in an absolutely incredible situation in the world, have you know? I wrote that book very fast, but I spent 2 years, but only writing. And I think that what I discover in pure philosophy is very important if you are a philosopher, because it is a part of our humanity and we don't speak so much even. And if you are a theologian too, because perhaps God has the potentiality, has got the possibilities, the ability to reach ourselves in what we are living in that case. Because you spoke that you read my books in theology, and the question is, but what God is doing with your illness? What God is doing with the death of your child, and so on. It's not a question of sin. And I think it is a complete opacity in theology. We never speak about it because we completely forget what the Sheol means. And the Sheol is not sin only. Okay, so you see, and now because of the conference on spiritualism, I will give conference in March on spiritualism and phenomenology, the case of Maine de Biran, I am writing on spiritualism. So I explain it in the By Way of Obstacle. If you are a true philosopher, it's my mind, you have always to change. We have period. So me, when I begin something, I have to change. So perhaps you can be astonished of what I explain about the trauma, but it is a part of us. And if we believe in God, but we are not absolutely not obliged to believe in God. And of course, we can work on theology and not believe in God. If we are believing in God, God is able to rejoin us in what we are living. And in that case, I explained that God, only God can be with us in our trauma, and the other can be only near me in my trauma.
So you're saying that there's a possibility of reconfiguration of self through the presence of God who suffers with us in the midst of despair and trauma, like, which is not like, but this reconfiguration is like different from a resilience?
Okay, so 2 questions. First, okay, it's absolutely possible for God to suffer with us in our trauma, even if in the trauma I can't suffer anymore, if it is a true trauma. That is the point. I explain it in the Guide to Gethsemane. I explained that I'm okay to speak about the suffering of God, but if we speak about the suffering of God and even about the suffering of the Father, it is, for example, for Bernard of Claraval, or for Origen, but we have not to fall in the patripassianism. It is only because God makes a choice to suffer with us. That is the first point. The second point, you said, I don't remember, is it possible to God to rejoin our trauma? Yes, but I don't think, or I've never said that God put me out of my trauma. because I think it's too easy. If you fall, I don't know, because you drink, because of erotic comportment and so on, you can ask to God to change, but after you fall again. In fact, to be saved is not to go out of our trauma. To be saved is not to be alone. And I think it is exactly what we experience in a couple, not to be alone. In fact, it's when we are alone in what you live that is absolutely a trauma and a chaos, because you are completely empty of that. So the other, your friend and so on, is with you only because he's near you. What does it mean? It means that he can't suffer what you are suffering, but he's near you because you are not alone, because he knows that you are feeling something that he can't feel. That's it. But God can feel what you feel. And that is the case of the Holy Saturday. I agree with you.
Thank you so much for your remarkable and amazing comments.
Thanks.
Well, Emmanuel, should we end it there?
Yeah, I have to go.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us at the seminar today. It was really my pleasure. And it was a wonderful presentation, a great discussion. And this, as I said, this was recorded, so it'll be posted later for anyone who may want to catch it later. Any final comments you'd like to make, Emmanuel, before we conclude the seminar today?
Oh, for me, it's perfect.
No? Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone.
Hoping to see you again, to meet you again in French or English, but I'm not sure. If you can hear French, my conference on spiritualism and phenomenology will be in distanciel on Zoom, so it will be possible for you to follow the conference, but it is in French.
Also, you can give us the Zoom link.
We don't have it yet. It will be on the. It will be. I think you will have it, and it will be on the website of the Catholic University of Paris. It's French. So there are 6 lectures. The 7, 8, and 9 of March, and the 14, 17, and 17 of March. So it is in March. And if you don't understand French, or if you want to see something in English, I can refer to the video of Tim, which I saw it. I saw that to my wife. It's absolutely incredible. It's so dynamic. It's incredible video. So very, very close of what I wanted to say, because Tim came to Paris with his family to do this video, and the result is incredible.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, that was fantastic of your work. So Tim did a very good work. What is the name of your website or theology?
Oh, it's Timeline. It's Theological Timeline, I think it's called. But the links are up there.
Okay, so you can see it. Okay.
I put the links to those lectures in the chat, so I highly recommend anyone who's interested in Emmanuel's work check out those.
And Stephen's hopefully doing another one for it soon.
Okay.
Yeah, I got it. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Emmanuel. I hope to hopefully see you in Paris one of these days. But in the
Me
meantime,
too. I'm hoping, Tim, you are coming to Paris next time.
It'd be lovely to come again.
To speak French. And what's your name? Hannah Han Hayun too. Okay.
Oh, you were talking to me. Oh yeah. My name is Heian Han.
Okay. What are you doing? You are doing on what? You are working on what? What is your?
I'm mainly working on French phenomenologists, including Michel Henry and Levinas, and also modern Jewish figures like Buchber and Hermann Cohen.
Okay. So if you want, you can send me an email. We stay in touch. You find
that would be very nice of you. Okay. Thank you. I really appreciate your kindness.
Find my email on the VCP or another one. Okay.
Okay, I'll send you an email. Thank you.
Or you ask my email to Stephen or to Tim. Okay.
Okay.
Allez, see you soon.
All right,
Thanks,
goodbye, everyone. Thank you for.
Thanks,
thank you for
Stephen, for the
today's session.
organization, and thanks, Zach, too. Okay.
Yes, oh,
bye-bye.
it was our pleasure to have you. Thank you for the talk. All right, bye, everyone.